You will arrive along the old road. It winds with a troubling, serpent-like suggestion through the corrupted countryside, leading only, I fear, to ever more tenebrous places. We will find our redemption.
Darkest Dungeon is an interesting game. It's difficult, it's incredibly punishing, and it's fantastic, but it's also, not for everyone. And I say it's not for everyone as someone who gets an absolute kick out of this game. There are a lot of games out there that I like and that I can recommend to anyone without question. Games like Breath of the Wild and Mario Brothers. Even StarCraft or Hollow Knight are a lot easier to recommend to someone than this game is. But Darkest Dungeon is aimed at a very specific audience. So today I'm going to tell you all the great things about this game and some of the things that I don't like or that aren't necessarily to the common person's taste. If this ends up sounding like something that's up your alley, seriously, go give it a shot. It's a great game. And indie games like this are way cheaper than AAA titles anyway. On the other hand, if this doesn't sound like something you'd enjoy, don't hesitate to pass on Darkest. One man's treasure is another man's trash, and Darkest Dungeon is a fantastic example of this. Anyway, I recently beat the quote-unquote easy difficulty for Darkest Dungeon, and I'm now working through the middle, more standard difficulty. Now, easy mode took me 83 hours to beat, which says a lot about both how difficult the game is, as well as how bad I am at this game. Not to mention that in those 83 hours I lost 102 heroes, which is a lot, I think. Before anything though, what is Darkest Dungeon? Well, it's a turn-based dungeon crawling game minus the top-down element, where you assemble a group of 4 heroes, or less than that if you're an absolute psycho, to battle through small labyrinths, complete objectives, and gain treasure and experience. The gameplay loop is roughly as follows. Assemble a team of class-based heroes, outfit them with provisions for their expedition, explore an area and defeat its occupants, and then finally return home to get your adventurers any medical attention and some much-needed stress relief from their harrowing trip. Wait, did I say stress relief? Yes, you heard that correctly. Perhaps the most unique mechanic in Darkest Dungeon is its stress system. It results in each of your adventurers essentially having 2 health bars. One is a traditional hit point number, their physical health, and the other is an ever-increasing stress meter, their mental health. If the character's stress grows too high, the character may become afflicted and start acting counterproductively, which can cause the rest of your party to lose health and gain more stress faster. If a character's stress maxes out, that character suffers from coronary thrombosis and immediately drops to 0 hit points. This design results in challenging and complex gameplay, where you have to make sure that neither bar gets too extreme on any character in your adventuring party. Now, Darkest Dungeon is definitely difficult, and you will lose some heroes, but difficulty is not where the true challenge in Darkest Dungeon lies, which may sound odd until you have more context. The true challenge in Darkest Dungeon is not in that it is difficult, but in the fact that it is punishing. A very difficult game can still be pretty manageable if it doesn't punish your mistakes that badly. Just look at Celeste. Celeste is a very challenging game, but if you screw up, it just sends you back a few seconds to the start of the room. Despite the very high difficulty of the game, you have countless opportunities to succeed and virtually no cost for failure. Not so in Darkest Dungeon. When your characters die, they stay dead. The game autosaves constantly, so no save scumming for you. After a hero dies, when you complete the current mission, you can go recruit a new one. But your new victim, recruit, will be inexperienced and have no gear. You'll have to spend your hard-earned treasure to get them good equipment and trinkets, and you'll need to send them on quests to get experience. And on those quests, there's a chance that if you're sloppy or greedy, or sometimes just plain unlucky, you'll lose that hero too. This means that one ill-fated quest with highly experienced characters can cost you hours of gameplay time. Punishing games can be a very frustrating experience for the typical gamer. They tend to be rage-inducing, and Darkest Dungeon is no exception. However, there are reasons to like a punishing game as well. First of all, it adds weight to every decision you make. Because the consequences of failure can be so high, achieving success can be much more satisfying. Barely making it out of a quest with all your heroes still alive, and hopefully with not too many new diseases, is a really rewarding feeling. Another reason that the punishing nature of Darkest Dungeon is enjoyable is because of how it meshes with the game's tone. Darkest isn't a game with jump scares or anything, but it is essentially a mesh of gothic, cosmic, and survival horror tropes. The artwork is gloomy, the story is bleak, the narrator is bloodthirsty and nihilistic, the soundtrack varies anywhere from melancholy to panicky, and the gameplay is, well, as we said before, difficult and punishing. Whether this tone is to your liking or not, there's no denying that this is a great example of how the narrative and the gameplay just work together really well. It's a very coherent experience where every aspect of the game works towards a unified and engaging feel. Another point of frustration that a lot of folks will have a hard time with in Darkest Dungeon is not directly related to the prior claims, but it does compound them a bit, and that is Darkest's reliance on randomness. A lot of games with random elements have a favorable degree of pseudo-random in place, which makes sure that the game feels random without the player losing unfairly too often. No such background process exists for Darkest Dungeon. Your max level characters can absolutely get killed in just 1 or 2 rounds of combat if enemies all happen to critically hit your guys. I have seen enemies land critical hits 5 or 6 attacks in a row, while my guys are conversely hitting nothing but air by sheer dumb chance. There's not always a winning scenario, and if you want to minimize casualties, you'll want to meet a friend of mine. It's called the retreat button. If things are going south, just give my little friend here a pat on the nose and he'll get you out of there. Except when he can't, but we don't talk about that. Another really interesting aspect of Darkest Dungeon is how much it focuses on preparation. Between quests, you have the opportunity to upgrade your adventurer's gear, unlock new skills for them, upgrade existing skills, give them trinkets that provide some nice buffs, and manage their quirks, removing their worst ones and solidifying their best ones so that they don't lose them over time. On top of this, when you begin an embarkment for a new quest, you need to select provisions. Provisions include food, torches to keep your path well lit, bandages, anti-venom, shovels for clearing cave-ins, and a bunch of other stuff. Selecting the right provisions can have as much influence over the outcome of your quest as your actual tactical skills in the quest's battles themselves. If you spend too much on provisions, you'll constantly be broke, and you won't be able to upgrade your hero's armor and weapons, and you'll be hurting a lot more when you lose heroes because it's harder to catch back up to where you were when you don't have any spare cash to spend. If you bring too few provisions, you make money faster, but you risk losing heroes more frequently, and you'll end up having to abandon more quests. If you bring the wrong provisions, you get the worst of both worlds. Provisions can make or break a quest. I remember once I didn't bring any shovels on a quest, and then to my great dismay, I had to clear not 1, not 2, but 4 collapsed passageways in a row by hand, which costed my heroes dearly in hit points, stress levels, and torchlight. It's quite frankly amazing that any of my adventurers managed to make it out of that quest alive. So, yeah. Darkest Dungeon is a fantastic game, but it's vicious, it's unforgiving, and it's downright dark. It says it right in the name of the game. This game's not for everybody, especially for my boys. I mean, this is a Christian channel, and I gotta say, there's a fair number of issues for my fellow believer folk as well. I mean, I'm playing this game, but it's entirely reasonable to say that even beyond the general challenge of the game, there are reasons not to play Darkest Dungeon if that's your conviction. So, for my fellow believers, and for the curious, here's a short list of potentially problematic game features. Pause here if this is something that matters to you. If you're a normie and don't care about this, don't pause, and we'll just move on. Now, so far I've mostly focused on the more divergent game aspects. Most things that I've mentioned so far are things that are gonna be enjoyable for some folks and alienating for others. But I do have some praises to give Darkest that are more universally enjoyable. First off, your heroes don't necessarily have generic attacks, and even if you can give them a relatively generic attack, you don't have to. This means that in combat, you're never just dealing damage, unless that's what you want to do. You can be constantly buffing and debuffing and stunning and inflicting damage over time or repositioning, so combat never gets boring. It's a very nuanced system that you can get a lot of mileage out of. You can try and play a straightforward I do damage as fast as possible and nothing else build, and that can usually work just fine. But if you're looking for a more nuanced tactical game, Darkest Dungeon can easily be that. Second, the sound design. I know it sounds like a small thing, but honestly, the sound design in this game is incredible. Every button press, every interaction just sounds so crispy. The narrator is also written pretty well, and is performed exceptionally. The game just sounds good in general. Third, if you're ever feeling overwhelmed by Darkest Dungeon, or if there's a part of it you don't like, you don't have to engage with every system in the game. Character quirks, for instance, can largely be ignored. It costs so much to have quirks removed or solidified that it's not always worth doing anyway. There's also character classes that I don't use much of, if at all. If there's a class that you don't like, or that you can't make work with your party compositions, there's nobody telling you that you have to get good at using it. I never really used occultists, and only recently started playing around with abominations, lepers, and grave robbers. You can tackle as much of the game as you're ready for, and come back to learn the nitty-gritty details of the game system later. So, yeah, if that sounds miserable, don't go get Darkest Dungeon. It's hard, it's mean, and it doesn't care about your feelings one bit. But if this sounds up your alley, I'd suggest giving it a shot. Darkest Dungeon is a fantastic game, and one man's trash is another man's treasure.